All right, so get this. We're diving into a proposal today, and it's kind of a wild one. It's using trailer parks to help rebuild after those crazy California wildfires.
Yeah, it's called the Palisades Recovery Trailer Park project. It's more than just slapping together some temporary housing. This is a whole 5-year plan by N5 Digital, Inc., that's trying to rebuild entire communities from the ground up, like hitting a reset button.
8,000 homes and 500 businesses gone, just wiped out. We're talking thousands of families and businesses with nowhere to go. How does this plan even begin to tackle something that huge?
It's broken down into 5 phases. Phase 1 is all about the basics. They need to secure a massive loan from HUD, like $320 million, find places to put these parks, and maybe the most important part, get the community on board right from the start.
That makes a ton of sense. You can't just plop down these parks without thinking about the people they're supposed to help.
Exactly. Then phase 2 kicks off, and it's all about building the infrastructure. We're talking water, electricity, sewage, the whole works. And they're aiming to do it all within 6 months.
6 months? That's crazy fast. How are they going to pull that off?
They're proposing to use prefabricated components. Think like those modular bathroom units you see popping up everywhere and pre-wired electrical panels, stuff that's built off-site and ready to go.
Smart thinking. Prefab can really cut down on construction time, which is obviously critical when people need housing, ASAP.
And then comes the really cool part, phase 3. Imagine this. A whole assembly line pumping out trailers to fill up the first park in just 6 months. They're even talking about partnering with multiple manufacturers to meet demand.
Wow, they're not messing around. But what about the bigger picture? It can't just be about speed. What happens once those trailers are in place?
Right, that's where phases 4 and 5 come in. Phase 4 covers the 5 years that the park is up and running, focusing on maintenance, resident support, and keeping an eye on how the rebuilding is coming along. They're suggesting setting up local service centers for repairs and using digital tools to track everything.
So they're creating a whole system, not just shelter, but a support network to help people get back on their feet. What happens after those 5 years, though? Does the trailers just disappear?
Nope. That's where phase 5 comes in the exit strategy. They're looking at a bunch of options, selling the trailers to other communities, maybe donating them to housing initiatives, even repurposing them into mobile medical units or classrooms. And the infrastructure they're going to study, whether to keep it, repurpose it, or dismantle it responsibly.
So sustainability is built into the plan from day one. They're trying to avoid creating a temporary fix that becomes a permanent problem.
Yeah.
Oh, let's get down to specifics. What kind of trailers are they talking about here?
They've got a few different sizes planned. Small trailers for individuals or couples, medium ones for families of 3 or 4, and then larger ones for bigger families. They're figuring it'll cost somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 per unit, depending on the size.
That's way cheaper than building a traditional house, especially with how crazy the California housing market is right now. Still, we're talking about millions of dollars overall. How are they going to pay for all of this?
Well, they've got that $320 million HUD loan, but the best part is they don't have to pay interest on it for the first 2 years. Then they're planning on using a mix of tenant payments, government subsidies, and whatever they make from selling or repurposing the trailers later on.
So rent payments, but they're also suggesting a sliding scale based on income, right?
Right, to try and make it affordable for families who lost everything. It's a super complicated financial model.
Definitely a lot of moving parts. Are the experts saying this is even possible?
That's a great question, and one we'll be getting into in the next part of our deep dive. We're going to look at how realistic this is, what challenges they might run into, and if this could be a model for how we respond to disasters in the future. Okay, so let's get back into it and really dig into the money side of this whole thing. We're talking about a $320 million loan from HUD, this multi-phase plan, and a mix of like tenant payments, subsidies, even selling off the trailers later on. It's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of moving pieces. What are the experts saying about all of this? Is it actually realistic or is it kind of wishful thinking?
Well, some economists are a little worried about relying so heavily on people paying rent, especially since a lot of these families just lost everything, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine having to make rent payments when you've just gone through something like that.
Exactly, and that could mess with their loan repayment schedule, you know, if they aren't getting consistent rent payments. But the people behind the plan, they're saying that 2-year grace period on the interest payments for that HUD loan will give them some time to get folks settled, help them find support services, hopefully get them back on their feet financially.
So they're betting on things turning around within those 2 years.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's not totally crazy because this project is also supposed to help kickstart the local economy. So if rebuilding starts moving and people can find jobs, then they'll be in a better position to pay rent, right? It's a balancing act, though, for sure, and something they'll need to keep a close eye on.
And what about those government subsidies? Are those solid, or is that another question mark?
The proposal doesn't really give exact numbers, but it mentions using existing disaster relief funds and maybe finding some new sources. It's a little vague, and some critics are saying that relying on government money, which can change with whoever's in office, or budget cuts, adds another level of uncertainty.
So that leaves us with selling or repurposing the trailers after 5 years. How much are they counting on making from that? Enough to really put a dent in that $320 million.
Well, that's where it gets interesting. They're hoping there'll be a big market for these trailers. Other communities that need affordable housing, or maybe even other places hit by disasters. They could be potential buyers.
Assuming the trailers are still in good shape after 5 years.
Right, that's a good point. Some people are saying that wear and tear could make them worth a lot less, especially in a temporary setup like this. But the people behind the project say they'll be built well and maintained throughout the 5 years. They're also talking about working with companies that fix up trailers, which could help boost their value later on.
So a lot of what ifs and maybes when it comes to the finances. What happens if things go sideways?
That's the big question, right? The plan talks about having backup plans, but doesn't get into specifics. They're definitely hoping for the best case scenario. Everything goes smoothly, they manage it well, the economy bounces back quickly, and they find a good market for those trailers when the time comes.
It sounds like they're walking a tightrope, trying to balance innovation and helping the community with the very real chance that it could all fall apart financially.
Yeah, it's a high-risk, high-reward situation for sure.
Right.
But even if this specific plan doesn't work out exactly how they envision it, it's making us rethink how we handle disaster recovery. It's getting us to think about the long-term, the financial side of things, and how to balance immediate relief with solutions that will last.
Yeah, it's a conversation worth having, and it's great that we're digging into this and looking at all the different angles. But there's more to think about than just the money, right? What about actually building these parks, managing them, and taking care of the people who will be living there? That's a whole other side of this.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the money side of things and whether it's even feasible, but let's zoom in on the people who would actually be living in these trailer parks. Building the parks is one thing, but how do you make them livable? How do you create actual communities out of this?
That's the part that gets missed a lot in these kinds of situations, right? You can give people shelter, but creating a space where they feel normal, where they can connect with others and start to feel hopeful again, that's the real challenge.
Yeah, it's so much more than just having a roof over your head.
Absolutely. And this proposal gets that they're suggesting having local service centers in each park staffed with social workers, counselors, even job placement specialists.
Wow, okay, so like built-in support right there in the community.
Yeah, and they're talking about community spaces too, playgrounds for the kids' gardens, maybe even shared workshops where people can rebuild furniture or learn new skills.
It's like they're trying to build a safety net right into these parks.
Mm-hmm.
But is it even possible to create a real sense of community when you're talking about thousands of people who've just been through this trauma and don't know each other?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The plan mentions community organizers and people to help facilitate things, but it's not super clear on the details. They'll definitely need to bring in people who know how to build communities, how to help people recover from trauma, and how to deal with conflict.
So finding experts who can handle the human side of this whole thing.
Exactly. And there are organizations out there who've done this kind of work, in refugee camps or after earthquakes and hurricanes. There are ways to create community spaces and help people connect and cope with what they've been through.
So this project could learn from what's worked in those situations.
For sure. It's about making this temporary solution a way for people to heal and move forward. But there's another thing we have to think about, right? The whole stigma around trailer parks.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
People have all these ideas about trailer parks being places with lots of poverty and crime and just being temporary. They'll have to work hard to change those perceptions and create communities that people are proud to be a part of, even if it's just for a few years.
So it's like changing the whole story around trailer parks,
Yeah.
right? Showing that they can be affordable and have strong community and that people are resilient and resourceful.
Exactly. And maybe even focusing on how these new trailers are designed and how they're sustainable, showing that these aren't like the old trailer parks people might be imagining.
Right. These are modern communities built to be resilient and sustainable. It's a huge challenge to not just build housing, but to make it feel like a place where people belong and can find hope.
This whole project is making us think differently about so many things, like how we respond to disasters, what we think about housing and community. It's making us ask what makes a place feel like home and how we can create that feeling even in the hardest situations.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive. The money, the logistics, and now the human side of things. We've seen the potential and all the things that could go wrong. So what do you think? Is this a realistic way to help communities recover in the long run?
It's tough to say. It's risky, but there's a lot to gain if it works. It's a bold idea, and it's pushing us to be creative, to rethink how we respond to disasters, and to invest in communities instead of just throwing up temporary shelters.
And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting, right? It's not just about trailers and plans on paper. It's about people and our ability to come up with new solutions and our drive to rebuild, even when things seem impossible.
And on that note, that's a wrap for our deep dive into the Palisades Recovery Trailer Park project. Thanks for listening.